In our world today, more than half of the global population has migrated to or near cities. By 2050, two-thirds of the population will live in metropolitan areas. Our world has become a network of connected urban centers, a web of cities setting the course of human history. You're going to enjoy my guest, the CEO of Global City Initiative, as we visit about global cities. Welcome to the Unconventional Ministry Podcast, where the conversation is about fresh ministry ideas and innovative approaches. I'm Dennis Weens, your host, Senior Impact Catalyst at Sat7 USA. My guest is Dr. Jared Looney, CEO of Global City Mission, author of Mosaic, a ministry handbook for a globalizing world. And Jared, it's good to have you on the podcast to talk about fresh ideas and innovative approaches. Welcome.
You bet. Thank you. Glad to be here.
You know, some of these statistics are really amazing. Half of the global population has migrated to or near cities. How fast is this migration taking place?
Well, if you look at our history, in 1900, it was something around 12%, maybe around 12. Some stats say up to 15, 16% of the world was living in or near cities. Today, that's about 55%, and we're headed towards 65 to 70%. We hit the 50% mark somewhere between 2007, 2009, depending on who you read. So I don't know the math on that, but that's pretty fast.
It's pretty fast. And I was curious because I grew up in sub-Saharan West Africa as a missionary kid, TCK, as we're called now. And I was curious for the capital city of Bamako, Mali, in the early 50s was 89,000, and the population today is 3 million in just one city.
Yeah. Well, I think Africa is really urbanizing at a very fast growth rate. It's still a majority rural continent, but that's changing very, very quickly.
Right. And with Sat7, of course, we work across the Middle East and North Africa, and you think of the mega cities of the Middle East and North Africa, Istanbul, Cairo, Tehran, some of those cities. Mm-hmm. And how can we do ministry in those urban metropolitan areas? Are we seeing the growth of cities in the U.S. at the same rate of global cities around the world?
Well, America's largely become an urban society that really took place in the 20th century. About 80% of Americans live in or near a metropolitan area. So we're already there, really. And again, especially if we're defining this as the metro area and, within a close proximity of a city, not necessarily just the city boundary. But what's been different in the U.S., I think, is the increasing diversity. United States has always been a diverse place, but now it's really not just kind of it's not mainly, it was never just, but it's not mainly the European waves of migration. I mean, now it's everyone coming from everywhere. I mean, global migration is happening all over the world. And so we've seen that kind of diversity, especially since the 1960s in the US, and it's just kind of continued to pick up steam. The thing about, I think, cities in America and the American church is, I think sometimes our worldview is a little more Jeffersonian than Pauline, if I can say it that way, that Thomas Jefferson had a really strong anti-urban bias, while Paul obviously had a very intentional city focus in his mission. And I think sometimes we've taken our playbook a little more from Jefferson than from Paul. And so that probably affects how we see cities and kind of the American church landscape.
I was on your website and, think about Orlando. And what do you think of when we say Orlando, Florida? Of course, it's Mickey Mouse, it's SeaWorld, and some of those tourist attractions. But it was interesting, 1 in 7 Orlando residents moved to the city following 2010. And half of those new Floridians were global migrants.
Yeah.
And Orlando's home to one of the largest public universities in the U.S., the University of Central Florida. Nearly half of the student body are ethnic minorities. Mm-hmm. So it's really changed one of our big cities. And it's also one of the most unchurched and dechurched cities in America. So it's interesting. You look at just one example. So talk to us about your global city mission and what's unique about your approach.
Yeah, well, we're asking the question, how do we take mission, principles, and practices and adopt, adapt, and innovate these principles, these practices at the intersection of globalization, urbanization, migration, as well as the emerging post-Christendom in our society today. The fastest growing demographic, or at least one of the fastest growing demographics in the United States, is the non-religious. In terms of religious demographics, it's the non-religious. And so how do we take missions principles and practices, especially as we think about disciple making, as we think about multiplication strategies, multiplying disciples, leaders, churches? How do we take these strategies and this thinking and apply this to this new context, whether that's unreached people groups, other global migrants, the post-religious, other subcultures, as we're working in these diverse global cities. And so a lot of our mission training in the past in the missions world and the effective strategies that have taken place. And I mean, strategies that really have reached a lot of people and are growing movements of the gospel. A lot of these have still taken place, not all, but a lot of these have still taken place in more homogenous or traditional societies. And so as urbanization and globalization continues, and it really will continue. I mean, there's little speed bumps in the road, but it's a kind of a human trajectory. How do we act like missionaries in this new world? So we're kind of existing to answer that question. We're not the only ones, but we're in a small club, and so we're saying, how do we really address, this? How do we take missions practices and apply these things in globally diverse cities, and doing that starting in North America? So I think that probably makes us a little bit unique.
Yeah, very unique, because the idea in the local church that I find is to really be in missions, you have to be sent to a foreign country, an international destination. But what your model is doing is working with the nations that have come to America and start in our mega cities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're kind of pushing back on the saltwater rule. It's only missions if you cross saltwater.
Right.
And so we're saying that, in reality, North America has always been a place where we should be participating in God's mission and seeing everywhere as a place for mission. Kind of the idea of home, really kind of a cultural Christendom. And then over there, kind of these foreign places are our mission. Now, listen, those foreign places are mission too. So I'm not supporting any dichotomy. I'm actually supporting no dichotomy. And
Right.
so we're not switching from there to here. We're saying here and there is what we want to be about.
In addition to working in global big cities here in America, you're also working through the local church in America. Mm-hmm. In that urban context. So explain a little bit how this model works in one of our mega cities of America.
Yeah, so we're doing a few different things. And so there's, when we talk about global city mission, we say we do three primary things. So the first is we're doing, life on life evangelism, planting, small group communities. And that's largely the work that our mission catalysts, that's what we refer to as our missionaries, the name we use for our missionaries. And so that's something they're doing on the ground. But we also, another role in Global City Mission is the mobilization catalyst, and they're saying, how do we get more of the church involved? And so we're kind of working both sides of the equation in that way. And so part of it is just grassroots outreach, and so somebody may be living and working and just building relationships in a city among an unreached people group, or that they're seeking to connect with and work with in that city, and just doing grassroots outreach. But we're also working to equip and to mobilize existing believers to reach their own communities as well, because we need to see discipleship moving forward, disciple making moving forward in everything we do.
I know on our previous podcast, I interviewed Lisa, and Lisa is just part of a local church that was doing an outreach, and she was hesitant, but she overcame her biggest fear, and that was having a conversation. She actually started a conversation with a lady from Afghanistan, and Lisa, overcoming her fear, met the biggest need of that lady from Afghanistan, because she wanted an authentic relationship. She wanted an authentic conversation with somebody she could trust. That opened up her being introduced to multiple other women in the same situation, but it all started with Lisa overcoming her fear of having a conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Yeah.
an example of what you're talking about is just authentic relationships in community and life on life.
Yeah, that's exactly how we do training and mobilizing existing believers. When we Global City Mission first started, it really was just an idea that there needs to be more missionaries in cities.
Right.
That was kind of the initial idea. And then we realized we need to help mobilize existing believers. And so we kind of did that. And we really were just kind of coaching up people that fell in our lap. And then eventually, a couple of years ago, we put together an online cohort where we try to take people through that life on life evangelism, just giving them some skills they can practice and helping them think about how they could start, like a group Bible study in their community. And then we realized that because we're living out in our team, we're living out ministry at the missionary edges of our society. I mean, we're largely working kind of outside the walls of the church, but so we're learning a lot from that. We're having these experiences. So it's really our responsibility to bring that learning back to the local church. So then we also provide evangelism training for church members and churches. And so trying to do all that just to move it forward. And one of the comments we've gotten from the kind of training we're doing, because it really is just how do you engage in everyday conversations? How do you integrate the gospel into that? And so one of the comments we've gotten is, I never thought I could do evangelism, but what you're teaching us to do, I can do that.
Right.
And we just want to see that play out over and over and over again.
Do you find that the local church is receptive to this model?
Yeah, increasingly so. I was just in a conversation yesterday with a church that is beginning to pursue a lot of their church planting into launching house churches. I also am, as we train in churches, I mean, what we find for training churches to do evangelism in their own communities is that a lot of leaders, a lot of church members, I mean, they just feel like they want to do something. They just don't know where to start, and they just don't kind of know how to do it as the culture around them has changed.
Right.
And so, there's a real openness, I think, that's out there. And I think, and even the aspect of looking at cities, I think is becoming more on the radar for people as well. So really everything we're talking about, I think we're seeing incremental increases moving that direction. It's not racing ahead necessarily, but I think we're seeing motion.
Well, how can people learn more about this model? And then you got a website. What's that website?
Yeah, website is globalcitymission.org. All one word, globalcitymission.org.
And then somebody that goes there, there's a lot of information. What would be the first tab that they should click on as a starting point to learn more, and what would be the first step?
Sure. I mean, they could hit get involved and look at any things that fall under that tab. They could, if they fill out, one of the information forms, and contact us, they can let us know like which kind of conversation they'd like to have. I mean, it might be someone wants to do training through one of the online cohorts, learning how to do life on life, relational evangelism, and start a discovery group in their community. They may be interested in being a mission catalyst. Maybe even a returning missionary says, man, I really want to keep working among this people, and so who should I talk to? We'd love to have those conversations. Could be someone interested in mobilizing the body of Christ and interested in being a mobilization catalyst, helping move people from the pew to the harvest. And so that may be a starting point. Another starting point could be someone who is in leadership in a church and would say, man, I'd love for you guys to come do a training there on just equipping my people, my members to reach out in their communities. So there's some different starting points. I think just, fill out one of the online forums and just let us know, kind of what you're interested in, and we'll take the conversation from there.
Yeah, and it's not like you have to live in a city of 5 million people to get involved. A smaller city has migration and immigrants and refugees.
Absolutely.
And then get on your website. It's amazing. You think of the concentration of Afghans in America, or Somalis, or Arabs, or Egyptians, or Africans. It's amazing where the concentration of these people are, and
Absolutely.
where you find them in even smaller communities. So I encourage people to get on the website and become informed. And because once you become informed, God can begin to use that and direct you to get more involved. And this would be a good podcast to share with your church, your missions team at church, so they can learn, and invite Jared to come and present it. So again, I appreciate you, Jared, coming on the Unconventional Ministry podcast. This is a fresh, innovative idea, and so we appreciate it. So thank you for joining the Unconventional Ministry podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
And if people have questions, I trust they'll get on your website and they can track you down.
Absolutely.
You're under the leadership tab, and so
Yeah,
they can track you down and ask their questions.
absolutely.
So get on the website, globalcitymission.org, and be informed of a new approach in the mission world to reaching out to your neighbors. In our changing world, there are more ways than ever to do ministry. Sat7 as a broadcast media ministry is changing how ministry is done. Through innovative approaches, collaborative efforts, broadcast satellite television, web streaming, and social media, Sat7 is making a difference. Visit Sat7 online today at sat7usa.org to learn ways you can be a part of this kingdom work. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please share it with your friends. If you know of an unconventional ministry approach, please introduce us. We'd like to have them on as guests. Thank you again for joining this episode of the Unconventional Ministry Podcast.